So we'll open it up to the floor. If you've got any questions, but I get first stab, by the way. I just one quick question. You spent, was it 8 or 9 years in Nazareth House? Is it Nazareth?
Yes, I spent 3.5 years in Father Hudson's homes, and the remaining period until I was 9 in Nazareth House in Birmingham, so six plus years. Yeah.
So you survived that. You obviously your book. You survived that when there's a lot of horrendous stories came out of Nazareth House, and I'm just wondering how has being in Nazareth House, do you feel, affected your life? I mean, in terms of how you deal with people and your relationships, and how do you think that your experiences back then, affect you today?
Well, I'm sure, like many people in the audience who love reading and who like biographies and autobiographies, and particularly with the issues that we're addressing this evening, I've read numerous accounts from people who, for example, were in care in Nazareth House. I mean, some people say you couldn't even call it in care for some of the experiences. It doesn't make sense. And there's no doubt that in comparison to some of those narratives, my experience was nowhere near as horrific and vile as their experiences. However, I do comment on this in the book, there were certain experiences that were similar to some of them. I mean, I don't know, I don't suppose the nuns actually really received any training in childcare. But it's interesting, I think I've read at least 3 accounts, if not more, of individuals who had grown up for a period of their childhood in Nazareth House convents, both in this country, in England, and in Ireland, in respect to the treatment of bedwetting, which was quite horrific. Now, I wet the bed, and all of these accounts were similar, that the punishment for wetting the bed was that in fact, I remember I was actually stood on a stool, and the wet sheet was just draped over you. And it's interesting that whilst I can't remember the names of any nuns at all, I'm really impressed with people who know the names of their teachers and others. I have never been able to remember. Now, is that because I've always had a bad memory for names? I don't know. Or is it that I'm repressing something? I don't know, I haven't a clue. But, so I have got that similar adrenaline. And I knew as a child that that was wrong, and that holy people shouldn't be treating children like that. I knew then. And then there were other, you might say, less horrific accounts. But I mean, I remember there was one, and we're talking about the issue of race in care. If it wasn't so horrible for a small child, you could actually laugh at this. And that was when I was chosen by one, and that was the other thing. Some nuns were lovely and some were ugh. The majority of the nuns, for me, were fine. Really, they were fine. But I remember one nun had decided that I would be chosen to be Humpty Dumpty in this little play we were going to do. And oh God, I was so thrilled. And then another nun comes along and says, no, you can't have a coloured Humpty Dumpty. I mean, even as a child, I knew that that was really Alice in Wonderland. I mean, what? Humpty Dumpty? What colour is Humpty Dumpty? And I had learnt at that stage to keep my little mouth shut and not argue with this nun. But what I must have learnt was if I bawled long enough and loud enough, sometimes things happened. And it certainly happened in this case. Because the other nun said, she's going to be Humpty Dumpty. And I was Humpty Dumpty. So there was that. But then, on the other hand, I have lots of very positive memories of Nazareth House. The Irish dancing, the Rakes of Mallow. I mean, I loved Irish dancing. And I was the only little brown girl in the ring. And I do actually remember going to Stoke-on-Trent. Now, why would I remember a name like that? It was because it was a dancing competition. And I remember it was as though we were going to be boxers, because I remember there was a raised podium, I don't know what you call it, and we had to go under the rope and go into this, to dance. And I just loved it. And I loved the buckles, and I loved the uniform, and I loved the I absolutely adored the Irish music. I absolutely adored it. But I remember I used to get medals for it, and I did used to remember sort of, not trying to stereotype, please, but I do remember beery-smelling men, but actually very nicely giving me half a crown. That's giving my age away. I was really pleased, and then the nuns would take the half crowns away, and I've never seen them again. So I would have these sort of mixed opinions about the nuns. That, you know, there was some, and in my mind there was just a few that were really quite nasty, and that the majority of the nuns were okay.
So have they turned you off your religion then?
Well, when I was about 11 or 12, I realised that I couldn't believe in God. It just didn't make sense to me. But but I'd been brought up a really good little Catholic, and indoctrinated in the sense that if you had a problem, I'd read about all the miracles, not read, I mean, we'd been taught about all the miracles, and I used to be in the church on a Sunday morning thinking, I'm going to go to hell because I can't believe in this God. And I would look at the statue of Holy Mary, and I'd be looking for a sign, because aren't we brought up in the Catholic faith? You look for a sign. So I'd be fiddling with my rosary beads, and then I'd look very quickly up at the statue, and what I was looking for was to see whether any blood was coming out from the heart, because that's what I was looking for a sign, and I was looking for a sign to show me that God was true, was real, and I never found the sign, and so eventually I decided,
See, when I was searching through your book for all your names, I was looking for your confirmation name, because usually, I presume for girls, they choose a name. Did you actually choose a name for confirmation, or did you do your confirmation?
I did. I certainly did confirmation. I do remember that. I probably didn't mention it in the book. I think I mentioned the Holy Communion. I love the Holy Communion, because the big breakfast. And do you remember those little, I don't know whether it's still the case, but the little prayer books you got, and they were like shiny, hard, white, shiny covers. Oh, I thought that was that's all I wanted from my was one of these books, I certainly did have confirmation, but I can't remember what my name was. So that passed me by.
Good.
That passed me
by. Should we open this? Would anyone like to ask a question? Rosemary?
Hi, Elizabeth. I wanted to know, you talk about class and your mum and the dreadful trauma because she's had this beautiful baby, albeit the wrong colour. But I wondered whether her parents saw your mother's education, or the drive to force her to continue her education, as some sort of salvation for her sin. Because it seems to me as though there was this drive from your grandparents' side to get your mum to finish her education. I wondered whether that was seen as some sort of salvation, as though you were an operation, what was supposed to happen but you did, and look how my mum, look how our daughter has still gone on to complete her position, if you like. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Do you know, Rosemary, I honestly think, because obviously I've learnt a lot, and that I've gradually picked up from my own aunts in particular, they were so proud of my mother. She was a very gifted child. She pestered my grandfather to teach her to read when she was 3, and she was reading and writing before she went to school. And I think they must have grown up so proud of this daughter, and just felt that she had the ability to finish that degree, and particularly as Newnham College opened the doors and said they wanted her back. Now, I have spoken to some people who are from Newnham College and have said that in that era, Newnham College obviously didn't know that my mum was pregnant. There was a story about, being ill and having a nervous breakdown. They wanted my mother back And they made it very clear to my grandparents that they would keep a place for my mother to complete her degree. I just read it quite simply that they felt that she needed to finish her degree, that she had the ability to finish her degree, and that there definitely is in the correspondence when my mother is starting now to change her mind about going back to Cambridge, that they're arguing, well look, you know, you go back to Cambridge, get your degree, you can get a job, you can look after this child. So I haven't read that into it, but then, you know, I wasn't, obviously, well, I was around, but I've never spoke to my grandparents about it, I don't know. But that's how I view it. They wanted her to finish her degree. Just straightforward as that, really.
Yep, go ahead.
My question, sorry, excuse me, I'm cold. My question, really, for a lot of mixed race Irish people that were born and brought up in Ireland, we know that, you know, our mothers had a horrendous time, whether they decided to keep us within a family or for those that were brought up in industrial homes. But we also know that the fathers of these babies were often quite, you know, they were educated people, they were going through university, a lot of doctors. And I'm just struck by the fact that there are so many African men who had these children and they just left. So the fact that you found your father, I'm interested, Conrad, because you also said you went to find your father, and the fact that your dad was actually in the UK all that time, if you had an opportunity to talk about why he might not have come to look for you, or just kind of, I'm just interested in that kind of topic of mothers and fathers.
No, so, well, first of all, he had gone back to Nigeria. He had visited me in the convent. I had grown up knowing that my father had visited me as a baby, and that was all I knew. He'd gone back to Nigeria. I don't know the ins and outs. In my book, I list the questions I wished I could have asked my father, but I put it that how many children would ask their father those sort of questions. Maybe some would, but yeah.
Do you think that the African men would have been under pressure from their African side for having a mixed race child?
Oh, I think this is interesting. Can I just clarify one point though? Lorraine, I'm sorry, Lorraine. I'm dosed up with Panadol at the moment. I really apologise, Lorraine. Sorry. Just clarify one point for you. When I met my father so suddenly in London, he'd actually only been back in London following the cessation of the Biafran, the Nigerian Civil War. So he'd actually, he had got his law degree in Cambridge. He had gone down to London and been called to the bar, so studied to be the barrister at Temple Inn, and then he'd gone back to Nigeria. When I went to Nigeria, you know, obviously after I found my father, I discovered that there were issues. Apparently they had heard that he was going out with an Oyibo, and they weren't happy about that at all, because in that particular era, this is the Second World War, that he had come to Cambridge University. His father was a businessman, but it was always expected that he would come back, he would practice his profession, and he would support able members of his extended family. And I don't know whether they knew about me at all, but they certainly knew that he was dating some white lady, and they weren't too happy about that. They wanted him back, you know, and there was a lot of glory attached in that era of a son or a daughter, well, son predominantly, going to overseas, and the expectation was they would come back, and that this would benefit future generations of the family. So I don't know. I mean, again, I didn't ask the questions. He used to be teased when I was there, because they used to call me Little Lawrence. I looked so much like him. And he would take me around with him, and he'd take me to his social clubs. And these men, with all due respect, they were like little boys. They were having a whale of a time in their social clubs and wherever, you know. And over a few beers, they would relax, and they would tease him, and they would tell him off. And they would tell him off that, look, you see this daughter of yours, look what she's achieved, and you didn't do anything. I haven't put any of this in the book, you know. So, you know, and I think he was guilty. I know he felt guilty. But I never got to the bottom of what the heck went on with their relationship. I mean, I really would have loved it. I'm as nosy as anybody else, but maybe it's the Catholic, maybe it's the nuns that have made me so polite, you know. Certain questions you ask, certain questions you don't ask, you know. I don't know.
Thank you.
Anyone else?